Yeah, thank you very much for having me, and also for the kind words. It's more than I deserve, but um, I'll uh, uh, I'll take it. So thanks a lot to everyone here, also just for having me. Can you see my slides? Yeah. Okay.
Works.
Perfect.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I'm not known for short titles of presentations, so sorry about that. But it's kind of the summary of what I wanted to talk about. You've already introduced me, so I won't do that a lot. I would like to, at least show faces of people that are affiliated with us. So a couple of years ago, the Public Administration Institute of Leiden University, and we're actually based in The Hague, so that's also a very nice place for us to be at, right? Because it's in the middle of the administrative center and capital of the Netherlands. So that also brings us close to the very object we study. And there we basically over the years built a center, built a team. These are faces that come with it. Some of them might be familiar to at least some of you in this audience, I expect. So it varies from PhD candidates. We're currently looking for a postdoc actually on the use of AI in assessments in higher education. And we have assistant, associate, and full professors in this group. I really like it. It's a really dynamic group. It's a entrepreneurial group in terms of academic entrepreneurship. I won't go through all these people, but it's a very nice mix of people who focus sometimes on the individual level of bureaucrats, that civil servants that are affected by digital technologies, by AI, that use data science. People who are looking at the team level. One or two people really focus on, okay, what does it mean in teams, and how do teams deal with insights that are partially generated by fellow team members and partially generated by digital systems or AI tools. And then, how do you deal with the different risks and opportunities that produces? People who work on the organizational level and how public organizations innovate, and people work on the more policy level, and even also on the normative level. So part of our center, or part of closely affiliated with our center, is also a center on public values and ethics, and they cover public values in general in terms of what it means for governance, but also specifically for digitization. I've added links both to the word center here that goes to our website, and also to a recent bulletin that just shows a bit of the recent stuff we've done. A lecture by the minister in our group, all kinds of stuff. So if you're interested, I won't linger on the slide much longer, but you can always click and see more. What I would like to talk about, and I'm just setting the stage here a bit because I'm really sure this is familiar to a lot of you, but at least to set up my own story a bit, is to talk about data-driven tools, and mostly AI currently, of course, as opportunity and risk at the same time. So these pictures also mean to depict all kinds of things we can see governments do with AI, right? Better evidence for policy, a broader range of inputs, and thereby potentially also better representation of underrepresented groups. The use of AI in service provisioning, in supporting security, safety, the use of natural language processing, for instance, to aid civil servants in documenting a conversation, so they can actually focus their attention on the person they're talking with instead of writing everything down, finding patterns of fraud or criminal behavior in big data sets, etc. So one of the pictures here actually is of these rooftops. This is actually an AI generated picture. So initially I thought these were satellite dishes, these white things, but I guess they're just AI hallucinations that look like eggs and close for inspection. But yeah, that's how this works, right? Anyway, what it means to depict is a specific case we looked at, we worked on, where to adapt to a changing climate, municipalities try to incentivize people to get rid of the tiles in their garden and to use more green, more grass, trees, etc. So we can better deal with all the water. And this is a very nice example of these aerial pictures that aren't necessarily high tech, that are analyzed through algorithms to identify what degrees of green there are in gardens, and that's pretty complicated really quickly, right? If you just to separate a trampoline from grass, and to separate the shadow of a tree from the actual tree, etc. That kind of stuff. So there's a bit of work there, but especially interesting in combination with other stuff. So what are local policies in municipalities that incentivize people? Can we connect that to data about who lives here? Are these small families? Are these single people? And so what policy instruments work for what groups, for what type of homes, for what gardens? So the combinations of all of these different data, not necessarily a very advanced AI, some parts of it are, but the combination of this make for a lot of opportunities for governments to address more complicated, more complex problems, even in times of resource constraints. At the same time, all of this is also a threat, right? There's also a conversation that has quickly developed also. For instance, in the Netherlands, many of you might have heard from the child benefit scandal, which had an AI component to it, but I would say it's also very much a question of a problem of different layers of government and how they deal with each other, and also the subtle ways in which digital systems interact with the humans that use them, and vice versa. So even if it's not really an artificial decision, still it can have big effects. Another example in the Netherlands is the so-called Siri system. It's not the Apple voice assistant, but spelled slightly differently. That's a system for risk identification that municipalities had as a tool to identify welfare fraud. And it never really worked because the data was just too poor. So that's one problem. But the very interesting thing about it was that it was also a court ruled that it had to be abandoned because it violated human rights. So not anything less, but really violated human rights. So in that sense, it was a big case. But there too, you can really see how connected it is with the very act of governing, because this system was part of a law that dissolved some of the powers from the national government to the local government, involved a budget cut. So these local governments had to do better risk identification with less money. And to aid them in it, there was a tool and a system that was legally allowed to actually help them do it. But then eventually the system was abandoned. Also, Parliament said we will no longer use this system. But of course, the budget cuts never were retracted. So yeah, that's how we sometimes, that's a good example of how we sometimes also put forward technologies to help solve problems. But we've never fully considered the intricate ways in which technologies and policies and implementation are all connected. Anyway, long story short, many of these systems, apart from the opportunities that they have, also present risk, right? Sometimes we just have insufficient view on how they work, how data is collected or analyzed or processed, whether there might be discriminatory or stigmatizing effects of a certain system that we haven't anticipated or haven't seen. And of course, government here has a stronger responsibility than other types of actors that use similar systems. So if public servants work with a system of which they actually don't really properly get how it gets the results, then it's certainly a risk in terms of good governance instead of just a risk of poor service. So that's kind of setting the stage. The background of all of that is data, right? So the picture here means to depict it. There's a lot of data that we also have had in governments for decades. Some people call it the new gold, others call it the exhaust of the digital society, which sounds less shiny and less valuable, but it's both true, I guess. But yeah, these data come from decades of digitization, 50, 60 years of old systems of digitally capturing and processing information. And certainly, I think that holds for many countries, at least holds for the Netherlands, the debate about how organizations and government organizations use these data, how they put them to use, which often involve involves algorithms, turns from 0 to 100 in no time. Right? It's just I think it's particularly because of ChatGPT and the and just how we view conversational agents as something that is something we can relate to, that suddenly everyone has an opinion about AI. Whereas a year and a half ago, people thought, okay, yeah, they're just an old technology, sounds interesting, I'll trust you with what you say about it, but now everyone has a view on it. And that means that all kinds of systems that we've also had for 10, 15, 20 years are currently looked at through the perspective of how people view primarily conversational agents. But then if you put these two together, right, if you on the one hand see this old world, the old systems that are basically everything governments do. I think in the Netherlands, about 80-something% of everything that's spent on government IT goes to maintaining, repairing, improving existing systems, some of them decades old, and only 15-20% goes to new systems and innovations, right? So there's a bit of a mismatch between the debate we have about it, the hopes, expectations, and risks that we see on the one hand, and on the other hand, what the actual landscape of government IT looks like. And this is the realism part of the title of my presentation. So I think if we are to have a meaningful debate about it that goes beyond just opportunities and risks, to have a meaningful debate about it, I think we have to better capture some reality, right? So because in practice, we know if we look at the nitty-gritty details of how data is used in government, we know that people make very small, quick choices, that they don't always understand that these might have implications for policies or for services, that the users of AI-generated insights don't really know how they came about, that big data analysts are pressed for time and sometimes capacity and have to deliver something faster than they find justifiable. And that oftentimes, and that's because of this big set of old systems, oftentimes the data that are being used is too heterogeneous or incomplete or underdocumented or cannot automatically be queried to actually do something with. And then we know that these data analysts and the users of their products talk past one another, and therefore the analyst sometimes doesn't yield useful insights, and sometimes it isn't used in a way that the insights can actually support. And then we suddenly find ourselves talking about a debate about how accurate an algorithm is, without considering whether we actually should have looked at an algorithmic system for this specific task. So realism for me then means not just realism about what these systems do and what risks they bring, but also in what context are they used and what does that mean for them. So this realism, I'll briefly go into 3 points. The first, something I call a digitalisation paradox, which is basically what I partially just talked about, the data problem, and the fact that I think we sometimes overestimate how much control we have over it. Of course, these systems are human-made, but that doesn't mean that we can also just change them as we would like to. So the digitalization paradox, yeah, that's something that I've basically what I've just mentioned, right? On the one hand, it are these old systems that provide the data, that allow innovations and that allow these new systems, and at the same time, the existing way of working, existing processes, existing organizational structures are very closely connected to how these old systems are configured or how these current systems are configured. And that also makes it very hard to actually use new tools, new algorithms in an efficient way. So it's both, it's both the old that allows the new and the old that holds back the new. Then the second point that I also just touched upon, and that this picture is meant to reflect, is how messy data in any large organizations, hence also in government organizations, actually are. So this picture I often use to demonstrate to students how, for instance, in the Netherlands, in the 90s, there was a fixed target by law of how of what proportion of public services should be offered online. So in a certain year it was 60 something percent, and later it was 90%. So what government organizations did was not necessarily digitize these services, but just to provide the web page for it. And then they were printed out overnight, and then the old system would still be in place, and someone would pick up the stack in the morning and just type it into the system. Because, yeah, that was a efficient way to actually meet the target. That doesn't work like that anymore, but it still means that a lot of the a lot of the data that's in these systems that's captured before, or the way the systems are set up, or the way forms are designed, and how sensitive they are to typos, etc., is very much determined by design choices we made in past times, basically. An example from the child benefit scandal in the Netherlands is that initially one of the oversight bodies addressed the tax administration and said you're using the system in discriminatory ways because you're collecting or you're looking at multiple nationalities of citizens, where you're not allowed to, because only, I mean, if someone is a Dutch national, then they can get these benefits, and then it doesn't really matter whether they're just a Dutch national or whether they also have other nationalities. That doesn't really matter. But still, in the system of the tax administration, that was part of the query of the database. But to be able to understand that, we need to go back to the system that captured citizen information in the early 90s, because there were several fields for nationality. And these data sets were used and copied by the tax administration. And for the tax administration, it just, these fields could go anywhere. So at different columns, basically, to register nationality. It could very well be that the first column would just be empty, and then the second would say Dutch nationality. And or the third, and there will be another nationality or not, or maybe two, I don't know. But that means that in the system, you would have to query all of these columns to actually to just be able to assess whether someone has a Dutch nationality. So that was considered to be a big issue only a couple of years back, but can be understood, or understood in a way, at least can be explained by design choices made in a system that was also already replaced 15 years ago and designed 30 years ago. But yeah, and it was just done in a different way with a different rationale behind it. And then the third point is that I think we overestimate sometimes how much control we have over it. So this is just a random picture of a municipality in the Netherlands, and these black arrows are meant to represent interactions between one specific tax system. And we have a lot of these pictures, right? So enterprise architects love to draft these and to identify what systems are where and how are they connected and what data do they have, etc. So this looks very neat. But already you can see that just from this one system, it's connected to so many other systems in so many places in this one municipality, and also with external databases, external organizations, which of course is what makes it work. But at the same time, we also know that this one tax system at one department that has information about dog tax. We have that, I don't know if you have that elsewhere, probably. We have it in the Netherlands, right? So if you have a dog, you pay special taxes for it. So that part of the organization, when they started to digitize, they also digitized that data set with the dog owner information, how much taxes they will pay. And of course, everywhere there will be similar copies with partial information about residents, and partial information about different taxes, etc. And there are copies of copies, and very soon it gets very messy really fast. Well, the reason I want to show this is because if we then move to current day AI, we have to keep acknowledging that this is the background and the context and the data provider basically for new applications. For instance, training data. That's what this picture means. represent, right? So if it, yeah, this is a funny picture where the robot learns the supposedly intended outcome of this writer, and then it's funny. But yeah, what happens if this is about police data or criminal data, whatever, right? So, story here is that these two exist at the same time, right? So we're within the same organizations that have to provide services or do their task, and that rely on decades-old systems, on several copies of data that are connected in a way that sometimes no one knows how exactly anymore. These exist, and at the same time, these very same organizations, the very same data sets, these very same people also try to improve and innovate. And this picture, yeah, there are basically two suns that both pull on the same planet and get them to get closer, right? So to influence how that planet works. And this to me is the idea of both innovation and yeah, and basically stability, continuity that these organizations have. And then it's sometimes for many applications, it's yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense to then look at or talk about AI in a very futuristic form, because the problems we now see with AI often have to do just with the fact that we don't always see that we're asking the wrong questions, give the wrong commands, that we don't fully comprehend what limitations or biases or errors there are in the data that we use to feed AI with, right? So it's change and stability in one go. Now, then I'll get to the one piece of research that I can actually that I actually wanted to present, and that's a fairly recent paper that we published in Government Information Quarterly, where we looked at a couple of organizations and see how they actually deal with this tension, the tension of having a big organization with its structures, with its formal processes, with its control structures, with a workforce that's used to work in a certain way. And at the same time, these organizations try to innovate with data science systems and with AI technologies. And these technologies require certain things in terms of agility, flexibility. They require that you can try out stuff and develop stuff at the same time. So not just next to, but at the same time, you also just do what you need to do as an organization. So we looked at how these organizations deal with these tensions, and we used an older theoretical framework that's often used in business studies. To at least see and explain what happens there. And that's the lens of ambidexterity, which many of you might know, but it's the idea that you can use your left and right hand simultaneously. And that's also what these organizations try to do, right? So they try to innovate and just deliver at the same time. Some of the modes we found, and that's may not be a big surprise, but it's good to also systematically find it sometimes. One of the things we found is that some of these organizations try to organize AI innovation capability very close to operational teams, or having a data scientist in a team, for instance. And others try to organize a separate department that focuses on innovation. And that, of course, has effects, right? So the data scientist embedded in a team is able to provide products that are used and are useful directly for the primary process, but are technologically typically not very advanced. Whereas the separated department can get to much more advanced applications and tools based on a more long-term outlook on what the organization needs to do in the future and how it can do it better. They're better at brokering contacts with other organizations to learn from them, or to share data sets or training sets if need be. And these departments are better at figuring out some of the challenging issues, for instance, the legal issues in this organization. So you can imagine that there's one data scientist in a lot of different teams with one data scientist. The data scientist goes to the legal department and wants to build something, and then the legal department says, yeah, we think it's not allowed. And then there it stops. And we see that these centralized data innovation departments then have the capability to actually enter a conversation with the legal department and figure out how it can work, rather than just hearing no. At the same time, a lot of the stuff they develop doesn't find its way into the operational processes. So this is what this paper is about. And it shows a bit on how these organizations deal with these two strengths, or these two powers, basically, that have an effect on how innovation takes place in these organizations. So this is, I won't go through all the details, but this is a bit of the finding slide where we focus on one hand, or we explain on the one hand, the structural separation, right? So having innovation capability in a separate department, or focus on contextual integration. So that means local teams or operational teams integrate some of the capability, and also hybrid forms between them, which we found in some organizations. For those interested in this, I can talk about this a lot more. You can also just look at the paper. But in the interest of time, I just wanted to highlight this as one of the current researches that we do in this area. As said, not just me, but also in a team, other people look at how individual civil servants cope with this, how teams deal with this, how policies are drafted and how effective they are. But I guess that a lot of it has to do, and I think that's specific and interesting about the public sector, that on the one hand, we have this objective of good governance. It has to be responsible. It is value laden. It has this decades of digitalization, the old world that provides everything that we need also to innovate. At the same time, it's at tension with what these innovations mean to change, to do. And I think that dynamic is interesting in and by itself. Let me just mention four topics that, just in 1 minute, that I think are interesting to look at in the context of this paradox, basically, as just presented. The first one is power. I think it's a question that's been raised a lot, but still is very relevant here as well. So who controls data, systems, sources? Who decides actually what the goals are? Because even the narrative of doing data-driven work, and that somehow offers better insights than the tacit soft knowledge that organizations also work with, is also a form of power, of course, the dominance of that of that narrative. The second one is capability, not just capability, but also capacity of an organization to actually use digital systems in a proper way. And again, here it's not just about expertise or infrastructure and about data, but it's also about the capability to be able to assess if a external organization, a company, provides you something meaningful or something you'll regret later. Third point is that the advance of these systems affect how professionals work with each other, talk to each other, and it introduces new types of professionals that have their own ideas about what makes their work right and valuable. And that also brings me to the fourth and final point here, and that's about learning, right? So we have to figure out, or public organizations have to figure out, how to do both at the same time, right? How to make sure that the organization does what it's legally supposed to do, and at the same time figure out if it can innovate and under what conditions, and what data is needed, and what collaborations need to be built, and what expertise is needed to actually be able to do the same thing, but better and maybe more efficient later on. So those are four topics I at least find interesting looking at and going forward on. So the slides will be shared. So this is actually some of the research behind this story, and that is it as far as I prepared for.